Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for staying. I'm not going to thank Joe Mulholland for organising this school, or thank him for the privilege of having me here. He lured me and a couple of others this morning in a bus out to a harbour about 15 miles away out here to jump into the freezing ocean. And I was the last to get in, and as I stood there shivering, I heard a voice from Joe saying, "Come on, show you're the man, get in there," right? So, being the fool I was, I jumped in. 10 minutes later I got out. I was like a block of ice. And as I looked down, as I was drying myself, I thought I'd lost my manhood. And it wasn't until about lunchtime my manhood was restored again. And I thought for a while that Joe McGill could have faced financial ruin with a legal action from my wife. So, Joe. This should be moving. No, this should be moving. Okay, yeah. Okay, Fukuyama, who's probably the most esteemed and renowned political scientist in the world today, he's been quoted a number of times already. He says there are three things you need for a functioning democracy. One is technical competence, technocratic competence. Secondly is accountability, and thirdly is the rule of law. I'm going to concentrate mainly on technocratic competence. Lucinda Creighton talked about the jaw-dropping technical incompetencies that were discovered in the banking and regulatory system. There's one of the audience here today, I met him last night, who would have joined the central bank about 10 years ago. He would have joined the central bank with very deep financial experience background. He thought he was joining a group who were the elite and the creme de la creme of financial expertise. And he said to me, it dawned on me after a while that they hadn't a clue. Think about that and weep for Ireland. Now, one of the ways in which technical competence has been built up in the public service is through agencies. National Treasury Management Authority, people like John Corrigan, for example, who has played a blinder throughout all this period, the ESRI, the Health and Safety Authority, the Environmental Protection Agency, those institutions, those much maligned quangos, have enabled the state to hire in specialist skills on contract rather than jobs for life, for example, and in some cases pay them the salaries that they needed to pay to get that expertise in. So one of the things I would say about technical competence is that if you don't have the technical competence, you don't have the confidence. And repeated, the Regling and Watson, Nyberg, all these studies into the Department of Finance and others, which I'll mention later on, have referred to the timidity or the deference of the administrative system in speaking out, the dogs that didn't bark and so on. Well, you won't feel like barking, you won't feel confident in barking if you don't have the competence. The other reason you need competence internally is to, in fact, to evaluate the advice you're getting from consultants like Merrill Lynch. And I think it's ironic that on the infamous night of the guarantee, probably the most competent group of people who are from the NTMA were left in a side room and not consulted. So, technical competence of politicians, John Moran said before the banking inquiry that politicians lacked fiscal capacity. In other words, they hadn't a clue either about the financial parameters they were dealing with. And in other countries, as I mentioned earlier, ministers are appointed from outside of the political pool, the pool of elected representatives, because of their technical expertise. So the Minister for Transport or the Secretary of State for Agriculture, whatever else, are chosen. People like Patrick Honohan, for example, would be chosen because of their technical expertise. We don't have that, and it's not likely to happen. Now, I want to talk about the management system. This is my approach to where there's weak management, weak technocratic and managerial capability. And I'm only going to give you a few examples here to illustrate the significance of each element of that. To this very day, 10 years or 13 years, whatever it is, after the formation of the HSE, they still have not sorted the structures. They're now talking about hospital groups. Will voluntary hospitals come in with the public hospitals? I sit as a volunteer on a management team within the health system, and the structure is chaotic. And it's very difficult to hold people to account when the structure is chaotic. Still hasn't happened. We saw in the banking inquiry the contributions of John Hurley, who was from the central bank, and from Patrick Neary, who was in the regulator, each blaming the other because it was your responsibility. No, it was your responsibility. The structure was not clear. It was a bad structure. It was an Irish solution to an Irish problem. It was never an authentic, honest structure. Regulators, Niamh Hardiman was here on this platform. Her book, Irish Governance in Crisis, set out the government's repetition of establishing regulators but not giving them the delegated authority to carry out invasive scrutiny and to impose effective sanctions. In the police, in right across a whole swathe of domains of public life, the structure is not right. The health system is bedeviled with historical boundaries and demarcations between professions and their associated unions. That's just a couple of highlights on what happens when you have poor structure. Management disciplines, the curse of short-termism. I was the person who piloted the SMI, the Strategic Management Initiative, back in the early 2000s. It became a box-ticking exercise, and in areas like water, housing, and a couple of others that are now on the horizon, pensions, the integration of immigrant communities, asylum seekers. These are all things that require long-term planning. And there's a mismatch between the government cycle, at most 5 years, and the time frame you need to plan strategically for things like the things I've just mentioned. In terms of governance, we've heard again several times about the failures of governments. Paul has mentioned it. Implementation has improved, largely through the agency of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. They set up a programme office, they have a war room, they've listed all the projects that Paul has referred to do procurement, property, etc., shared services, and you can see the progress happening in there. Risk management, Paul mentioned it again, improving. I sit on a public service board, and by God, there is very, very granular forensic risk management. But in other areas, it's not happening. Management tools. If you listened to your radio yesterday, Gordon Jays from TUSLA saying that in TUSLA, dealing with tens of thousands of children at risk, dealing with a couple of thousand staff, have 3 people working in IT, and they just don't have the tools in order to do their job. That's very common in the mental health services, which costs about $1 billion, I think. Again, there are files going around in taxis from one hospital to another because there isn't the IT system. Benchmarking to date in this country has been a farce. Because, first of all, I'm not going to take you back to the history of benchmarking. I have yet to see a comparison, let's say, of teachers' pay and hours with other teachers' pay and hours in another country, which cannot be contested. The teachers will immediately say, you're comparing apples and oranges, we do more voluntary work, we spend more time out of the class, in the class, and in any case we're highly qualified, and so on and so on, and the whole thing is blown out of the water. It really is time for the DPAR, I would say, ESRI, whatever resources are there, to really establish the facts that give you a basis for decision making that is benchmarked. That's what happens in the private sector, as Paul would well know, the kind of messing that's gone on there. HR policies. I spent two hours with a senior civil servant not so long ago who told me that she was trying to deal with a member of her staff who wasn't coming into work, and when she came into work did very little and wouldn't take any instructions. And she said to me, if I pursue that person applying the rules and systems that we have, I will be the problem. Okay? And that's a very common experience. They don't get backing from HR, they don't get backing from their line manager. And they certainly won't get backing from their minister who doesn't want that kind of trouble. So there's a lot of work to be done, not just to establish the policies, but actually to have people using them. Functional supports, I won't bother going into that. More. Management rewards. What's the reward system? Robert produced, he's been candid about this all along, I think it was about last October, the latest set of statistics on the use of the performance management system. There was no change from the previous set, if I recall correctly. 99.9% of people receive a rating of 3+, and they get the increment. That's the system. It's a bogus system. It does not reflect relative contributions. Okay. The other point I'd make about rewards is this. For lots of key positions within our public service, the state apparatus, both civil service and public service, we're not paying enough to the people that we need to attract. I'll give you a simple example. The going rate for the head of finance in the HSE, which has a budget of 13 billion, is about 160 grand. Now, I can tell you that within 10 miles of this hotel, you'll find factories where the head of finance is earning more than that. And it's absurd. So the political correctness which says, oh, we can't pay them more than this, and certainly the Sinn Féin view that none of them should be paid more than 100 grand, is just absurd. We have to look, again, not just at a low pay commission, and if I may be so bold as to say, we need to look at a high pay commission in order to attract in the people who suffer by not getting these talents in are the general public. Management competence, training and development. Civil service is beginning now to recruit. I sit on the Public Appointments Board, and a couple of hundred new staff are coming in. For the first time, there is an induction programme out in the IMI. The Army has a very good system, mentioned earlier, I think, by Don, things that are done well. Revenue commissioners have a very good system. The hotel sector has a better system for training managers than the HSE. If you become a manager of a small hotel, even in this country, you'll have worked in Switzerland or whatever else under the very best hotel managers. You get very personal feedback, everything from how clean your nails are to the way you behave. So there's a lot of ground to be done there, a lot of work to be done there. And finally, the management culture. That's the mindset, and I'll spend a second on that before I finished. And the key issue, the absolutely central issue in relation to management mindset is, I'll come to it in a second, because I want to just give you one example. If we use that framework that you see there in front of you, there's a recent report out on the Department of Justice, and this is only like 2 months ago, done by a group of people led by Kevin Tolan from the Dublin Airport Authority. Here are some quotes from this. A large department, oversees 30 different agencies like the prison service, the court service. This is a huge body, Department of Justice. All of these are quotes. The culture is closed, unnecessarily secretive, silos, passive, stepping back from exercising power, deference and diffidence. The structures, they have not evolved to take account of differing demands. There's limited evidence of formal assignment of responsibilities. Things are not assigned to people. Processes, this is the management processes, that down here on management disciplines. The department doesn't seem to hold the 30 agencies to account. There's poor management routines and practices. There's no plan to deal with issues. And in terms of tools and information, very poor document tracking and IT systems that are old, serious lack of timely data. That's the year of our Lord 2015, and it's after 3 or 4 years of intensive efforts. I know about them by DPAR. It just has not penetrated the bastion that is the Department of Justice, and there are some other departments that I believe it hasn't penetrated. I want to say something about the administrative culture, the relationship between the officials and the politicians. And I've spoken about this at McGill before. The politicians are weak on technical disciplines and managerial competence. And the senior officials' primary orientation is towards their minister. There's a whole section in the Department of Justice case I've just described on that. Now, I think that one of the things that happens at that relationship between ministers and officials is that officials get bounced into supposedly doing things that they know from the outset are not doable. And I think that's going to change, because officials are now finding themselves before committees of inquiry, Dáil committees, where they're getting their backsides roasted for stuff that they knew at the time could not be done. A recent example is Tony O'Brien from the HSE. and under pressure to explain what went wrong in Port he had asked for 1.4 billion last October. He got 600 million, and under pressure at the recent oil committee, he said, in future, I am going to be more robust on whether I take responsibility for things that can't be done. In other words, I'm not going to portray myself as taking responsibility for stuff I know cannot be done. Gordon Jays was on the radio yesterday. Why was he on the radio? I believe he was setting out the picture that faces the Child Protection Agency. It does not have the resources. It needs 250 additional social workers. And he was setting out his stall, I believe, so that he's letting the public know I ain't going to be held responsible for stuff that I have told Minister Riley cannot be done. So that issue of deference to the political system, I think, still remains a huge issue. Sorry. I've just one or two more slides. This is the question that was posed in a paper produced by Robert's Department back in 2014. They posed the question, and I think it's a terrific question. How far should public servants rely on their professionalism and sense of personal morality, and how far should they simply follow instructions from their political masters? Now, I've had two answers to that from senior civil servants. I've asked them. Both of them have said, I am for democracy. One group, I am for democracy, means that they will prepare answers to PQs that are deceitful. 20 questions were asked by Catherine Murphy. The answers were written by public servants, which did not give the information that she was seeking. Why? Why were those answers given? Because it would protect the minister. Also, for instance, notes being not taken that there would be FOIable. Going along to get along, accepting being bounced into the unachievable, for example. Quoting from the Department of Justice, stepping back from exercising power. This is civil servants stepping back from exercising power and being over-deferential to the guards. John McCarthy, chief economist from the Department of Finance during the unravelling of the banking system. McCarthy was declaring he was presenting alarming information, but his boss in the Department of Finance said, take that out, it's too political. So there were people who were barking, raising the issues, raising the hairs. But in order to protect the political system, they were being told, take that out, temper that down, soften that down. So I think that the DPER paper, which was done by an expert panel last year, did not address this question. It was silent on this question. The alternative to that, that's one answer I get from, I'm for democracy, meaning this. The TDs are elected, the ministers are appointed, my job is to follow instructions of political masters. The other view is the view of Maurice Hayes, and I may say more about that, and that is the emergence of the civil service as the fifth estate, with a degree of blue water between themselves and the political system. Now, I did a presentation on that last year, and I'll say a bit more about it maybe later in the week. I want to comment on a couple of recent cases, very briefly. Irish Water, using the framework I had up earlier. I spent some time in Irish Water earlier this week. A couple of things. I would change some of the ratings I've given in this. The performance management system, the so-called bonus system in Irish Water, which I, among others, have criticised, is in fact the real deal. I haven't got time to go into it here. You'll see the head of RVA here later on in the week. It actually stands up to toughest scrutiny. It is a ballsy, hard, tough-minded, edgy performance management system, the likes of which I have not seen in the public domain and public service before. They have the technical competence. They know about water. But the biggest mistake, what's happened there, is that they accepted unachievable targets by politicians, and they're still doing it. Okay? My advice to them was, do what Gordon Jays has done. Get out in the open and tell the public the truth of the situation and let the politicians deal with the consequences. Portlaoise, management competence at all levels was awful. I'm aware of a part of the HSE that has a budget of 100 million, a staff of 500, and the head of that department is a clinician who hasn't a day's training in management. The process of governance, the information and risk, the HR tools. After all that's happened in Portlaoise, they're bringing in a consultant from England to advise them on how to hold people accountable. Now, can you believe that? But it's true. And financial regulation, again, something similar. Good progress. First of all, I want to acknowledge here, and Paul might have suggested at the outset that somehow I'm hostile to the civil servants. I look on civil servants the same way I look at other people in society, like teachers, priests. I hold them in very high esteem. But in many respects, they're operating within a bad system. And it's the system that I've attacked. I've not attacked civil servants. I made it my business to read the progress report that Robert Watt's department published just within the last couple of weeks. And they have a whole raft of excellent, relevant, apt initiatives underway. I've only listed some of them here because they wouldn't all fit. The Accountability Board, which I'll come to, shared services, open recruitment, project management, and so on and so on. I think it's 25 major initiatives. Textbook, state-of-the-art, and really worthwhile. And mapped out, documented, and many of them underway. So fair dues to them for that. What is missing from that is an explicit programme to codify the public service values and culture and embed them in the hearts and minds of all staff. That was recommended by the OECD in 2008, and it has not been touched ever since. Why is that important? You can put in all the systems you want, FOI, whistleblowers, whatever. They can be undermined by the culture. Culture doesn't just eat strategy for breakfast. It can gobble up all of this stuff above the line. I'm not debasing it. I'm just saying it would make all the difference. And Don Thornhill has often said, if you don't have an explicit programme of formation in values and so on, culture, the hidden curriculum takes over. Nearly finished now, Don. Connecting Fukuyama's three essentials. As I've said, technical and managerial competence. We've seen the catastrophic consequences of not having it. Very good progress is being made by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. Really very good stuff. The culture, but is the crucial piece that I would add to that. Accountability and the rule of law are the other three. Three remarks on the rule of law. We have a two-tier legal system. We don't, Matthew Elderfield has spoken before the bank inquiry just last week. We do not have the legal apparatus to deal with white-collar crime in this country. We just don't have it. And finally, perjury is not treated as a crime in this country. And there's a culture of impunity. People can go, they can swear, and they can lie under oath, and that's the end of the story. I just want to say two final things about accountability. The Accountability Board. Accountability is defined by DPER themselves as the formal obligation to submit to external scrutiny in explaining and justifying past conduct or actions. Listen to the edge in that language, with the possibility of consequences arising. That's their definition of accountability. The Accountability Board, which was lauded by Paul, the Accountability Board, which is meant to provide external scrutiny, is made up of the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach, the Minister for DPER, three Secretary-Generals, including the Secretary-General to the Taoiseach, DPER, and another one, plus the Chairman of the Revenue Commissioners. That's 8 insiders and 4 outsiders. That, to me, is not a credible accountability board. For example, the TLAC Commission, the Top Level Appointments Commission, has a majority of external people. The new policing authority, about accountability. The legislation last November had some things in it, and according to Conor Brady, writing in the Irish Times on the 9th of July, and he's talking about the watering down of the legislation that originally appeared, and that at every point the supposedly independent policing authority is subservient to the wishes of those holding power. One wonders why this elaborate charade is being constructed. It leaves things as they were in the past with a veneer of independence. Vicky Conway, an Irish academic based in the University of Kent, the original proposal that the Commissioner is going to be accountable to the new policing authority is gone, leaving us, and this to me it really sums up a lot of what we're facing, leaving us with the dispiriting prospect of this cycle of scandal, reform, scandal, reform, scandal, reform. I would just change what Vicky says. Scandal, half-hearted reform. Scandal, half-hearted reform. Scandal, a new bucket, but the bucket has a hole in it. The phrase that I think Donald Butler uses, so some new good stuff is presented, there's a new schema, a new law, a new framework, but the mice get at it before they finish. So, how do we reach Denmark? Which is the way, as was said earlier. Fukuyama's way of putting it. First of all, we know from Noel Dempsey and other speakers this morning, we're not going to get to Denmark by changes in the political system. It is unrealistic. Turkeys do not vote for Christmas. I believe the best chance we have of really significant reform lies in a critical mass of senior civil servants who continue to show leadership in building technical and managerial competence and in developing effective accountability systems, and also in developing policies to strengthen the rule of law. My hope for real reform and real movement and progress towards Denmark, to use that metaphor, actually lies in the civil service leadership. Thank you very much.